Hello, my name is Jens Gerke, and I will be covering over this slideshow presentation on the early identification of sepsis. So, to continue, the selected topic for this slideshow presentation is early identification and management of sepsis. A definition of sepsis is a life-threatening organ dysfunction caused by a dysregulated host response. This disease of sepsis can manifest itself into septic shock that can have profound effects on circulatory, cellular, and metabolic systems that can lead the client to even greater risk of mortality than just the sepsis itself. And as Henry E. Wang puts it, sepsis is a ninja disease. It quietly sneaks up on unsuspecting victims and rapidly causes overwhelming illness and death. It describes how terrifying and stealthy this disease can be. Why sepsis identification? The topic is important to me due to sepsis is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and the leading cause of death in non-cardiac units. Sepsis awareness is important to the public as this disease brings with it great potential death. If the capability of identifying the disease is not made a practical skill, like identifying if someone has a cold, but instead, with sepsis, the signs and symptoms are more subtle, and if gone unnoticed, will mean death, unlike the cold. The importance of early identification and management in the healthcare system is death from sepsis is an avoidable death. Through the diligent efforts of healthcare providers and professionals, early identification can lead to earlier administration of antibiotics that can cease the dysregulated host response to the septic infection. The importance of this information to the patient is this should be found important as with proper education to nursing staff and the emergency department and ICU sort of places. This should increase the capabilities of the detection of subtle signs in the patient, i.e. possibly being themselves. The Pidcock question. What is a Pidcock question? A Pidcock question is a question that focuses on the population problems, the intervention to investigation, the intervention in current practice to compare it to, the outcome and the time, all building up to create a format for a question that's able to help design clinical questions that directly are relevant to the patient problem. The Pidcock question for this PowerPoint is for patients at high risk for sepsis. Does simulation training of early sepsis recognition compared to no intervention influence the number of early identified cases of sepsis in an acute care setting over a 6-month period of time? The population identified in this question is for high-risk clients are the elderly, people with respiratory infections, and people that are recently coming out of surgery. As seen, the intervention to investigating is if simulation training can improve the early sepsis recognition. The outcome is to see if the number of clients identified early, if more clients are early identified, and for time is roughly a 6-month period is needed due to the effects of sepsis are so overwhelming and quick that immediate observation can be witnessed within a 24-hour period of someone if they're identified early or if they're not identified with the symptoms early. Discovery research. Now, through the discovery research for this project and for previous assignments in this class, the scholarly location of research conducted for academic journals was at the EBSCO host from the Southwest Baptist University Online Library. The search engine selected on EBSCO host was CINAHL Complete. This is a comprehensive source of full text for nursing, being a wonderful research tool for all areas of nursing and allied health literature. I found it to be wonderful and quite an amazing literature resource. Keywords selected for the search is early sepsis, sepsis identification, simulation, sepsis, and acute care. While discovering research on the CINHL, the search of early sepsis held results of 129 articles. Sepsis held search results of 4,469. Sepsis identification held only 18. And acute care held 16,913. That was a lot of results, and I needed to find a better way to search for information, or I'm going to be stuck on that website forever. So, on my continuation of discovery and research, in the process of finding research on SNL to improve research findings, items to advance search of research is using the BLULEM operators and or not in combination with keywords selected, and as well advanced research limiters as full text only academic journals and year of published constraints. With these constraints and the use of the BLULEM operators, text selection was reduced. For example, using early identification, sepsis, and simulation resulted in 24 results, making narrowing down my search way easier. Following these advanced research limiters presented above, this number was reduced to 12 articles for possible implication into my study of assignments and for this PowerPoint. With the implementation of full text option, this dropped it down to 22. Published constraints dropped it down to 21. And then when I made a choice to click academic journals, because I found with academic journals this would provide really good articles that were not biased, possibly at least to be least biased, to drop my articles down to 12, cutting it in half from the previous 24 that I started out with. Similarities that I found in my in the selected articles of evidence for my Pitcock question that I devised was that I found that I focused intentionally, but I found that by the purpose of all the articles were all similar to achieve the same goal, is to find and improve, and find if improvement in education would increase identification of sepsis and early sepsis management and things of those natures. I had a goal to it was identified in all the research articles, or many of the research articles, a goal to identify sepsis earlier, more effectively, use of education as a tool to improve earlier identification of sepsis in the hospital. Exclusion criteria for almost all the studies were extremely similar in design, yet for inclusion, this changed from study to study with the inclusion. And in conclusion, in all the studies, the conclusion supported the implementation of education to staff in the ED or ICU. As with education, it was found that this increased the pace at when antibiotics were provided to patients, meaning that it showed that there was early identification going with sepsis, as with it being best practice to provide antibiotics as soon as possible for clients with sepsis. Inconsistencies within the research was that inclusion criteria had huge changes across the board, or inclusion would result like a patient has to be over 18, cannot die from sepsis while in the hospital, has to be discharged with a diagnosis of sepsis, where in other articles, in other academic articles, it was just inclusion criteria was as basic as the patient had sepsis. So I found that to be an inconsistency amongst the articles. Data collection had a massive change as well, but that's not too much of a surprise to how data can be collected and measured. But I wanted to notice that, as that was an inconsistency too. The location of the studies did not all occur at one place. So it showed in two different articles specifically that one study occurred at 4 different hospitals and another study occurred at 2 different hospitals, while 3 of the other studies within the 5 studies occurred at 1 hospital. And the sample sizes had continuous variations. They were never within just staying in the hundreds, as seen right here. Sample sizes fluctuated from 150 to 33 people in a sample size, and 283 in another sample size. So, I had worries there that a representative population for these tests could possibly have least representatives that would lessen the representative to the specific population being identified in the research articles. Gaps and limitations in the academic articles supplied showed often articles that gaps that can be the articles showed specifically showed gaps that may be faced in the unforeseen future, as with the understanding of sepsis and the diagnostic tests that are used. For example, in one study, it focused specifically on that lactic acid tests may not be the best method for early identification, but for the diagnostic test of the progress of sepsis in the body, showing that lactic acid tests may not be a reliable source of information for identification of sepsis. As well, with limitations of the study performed at multiple sites with varied potential populations had varied levels of acuity, which showed there was an inconsistency and possibly bias with one hospital or other, and unforeseen circumstances from changing from one hospital to another, with changing standards and protocols as well that can manipulate data. There was one research article that occurred in a very short duration of time that had a major limitation to the ability to evaluate the long-term impact of the education's interventions. And evidence developed from 3 of the studies could have a higher chance of being biased, with a low representation of the specific population being people at high risk for sepsis, as 3 of the articles are level 3 being well-designed quasi-experimental designs and being not randomized and not controlled groups, where 2 were level 2 level 2 experimental designs that were randomized, which I was really happy to find, but good examples. In conclusion, why I believe there is evidence that supports practice change is that the goal of every provider should be to continuously learn, and with the subject of sepsis being a very subtle disease process, this is not just a disease that can be learned once then done, but is a disease that needs constant nitpicking attention, as the signs and symptoms can go past the most experienced nurse. Showing that education, meaning what I want to say is that education is a reliable source to keep people up to date to current information about disease processes. As with the speed and lethality of sepsis, the studies tests can be performed and have immediate observable effect on a unit, and as re-education of staff over the subject of it may be enough to save a few extra lives from the avoidable deaths of sepsis. And with NSC is and I'm not finding that the guidelines that the evidence presented within these research articles do not override or oversede the guidelines that are presented with sepsis that I found from guideline.gov, being a guidelines that focus on sepsis recognition, diagnosis, and early management. I don't find it that this evidence overrides or supersedes these guidelines, but the evidence goes in line and the evidence supports the guidelines on information on the education and early identification of sepsis within the healthcare system. I want to say thank you, and yeah, thank you. Oh, and here's my reference. Here's references right here, and more references right there. All right, thank you again for watching my video. Goodbye.